Warning, RC cars were harmed in the making of this video. What's up guys, welcome back. Today was just one of those days where the slash right here wasn't cutting it. I wanted to go out, get myself some nice vintage RC Nitro action, and I just wanted to wear a wrinkle-free shirt. Guess what? Today I managed to fail to do both of those. So the shirt's definitely got some wrinkles on it. I still love it. And this RC car definitely has got a couple problems on it, but guess what? I still love it. In this video, we're going to go over some of the common issues that older Nitro RC cars have. I've put together a list of the most top 5 common issues, and lucky enough for me, this RC's got most of them. This particular one is one of my favorites that I have. It is one of the oldest ones. I think this is about 1998 or so edition here. This is a HPI Nitro RS4-2. This one is really well upgraded. You could tell it has a really nice OS 12 CVX engine. Also, it has some fuel left in it. I wonder why there's some fuel in it. So I hope you guys all know that you're not supposed to leave fuel in the tank for more than a couple days. Issue number 1, ignition. These RC cars have a relatively interesting ignition system. It's not at all like a regular car or a 1/5 scale gas engine. These use glow starters. These actually have what's known as a glow plug on top of the cooling head. It is always lit up. This basically is what ignites the fuel mixture inside the motor. This particular one, let me take out the glow plug for you guys right here. You could tell that it is basically faulty. So the bottom of the glow plug is disconnected from the top. So what happened is the spring itself is physically 2 pieces right now. The situation here is, it could actually be much worse than it is right now. You gotta pray that this is what happens to your glow plug if you have any kind of glow plug failure. Because what could easily happen is that piece could dislodge itself and be loose inside the actual motor, and yet the motor will still run for a short amount of time before it shuts down. Now you will have extreme compression loss because that little piece of metal is going to scar your motor completely. It's going to be worse than a grain of sand inside. Make sure to check out the maintenance on your glow plug. Always examine it. Make sure that your glow plug is in good condition. This one was actually kind of old. I should have replaced it. This might be the original glow plug for this 12 CVX engine, so that was a mishap on my behalf, but lucky for me, I have a couple of these glow plugs and this should be squared away in no time. Another common issue that will result in a no-start condition on one of these, and this RC does have it to some degree, is a vacuum leak. This is a very highly pressurized fuel system. It works on back pressure. You can see that you have 2 hoses, one going from the fuel tank to the exhaust pipe here, and one going from the fuel tank going to your carburetor, which is your fuel delivery line. The other one creates back pressure. You need the pressure in the tank to be where it needs to be. You cannot have any leaks. If you have an exhaust leak or you have some kind of vacuum leak, usually a lot of the seals here on top of the fuel tank, you could see as I open up the cap of the fuel tank, you have an O-ring right over there. These could be faulty, could be letting in air. What I normally do to test this out is remove the fuel tank from the car and literally just blow into, one of the actual fuel lines and then see if any air comes out of the other one, or if it's clogged, or if I hear any kind of noises. So you want to make sure that your fuel system is completely sealed. If it isn't, you will not be pumping fuel to the motor when the motor is asking for fuel. A lot of times, even if you have a small vacuum leak, this can result in you accelerating and the engine will just bog down. It'll be very noticeable. You might think you have a poor tune, but you probably just have a vacuum leak. There are a couple places on the chassis of any RC car that can result in that. It could also be the carburetor itself. It could be poorly screwed into the carburetor body. This particular one I've noticed has a minor issue with back pressure, but it idles and it runs just fine. It also does high RPM okay, but it does tend to bog down a little bit. As you can see, I can move around this little tapped exhaust fitting here on top. Now this pipe was designed to be a universal fit, so this kind of fuel fitting on top here was tapped and drilled by somebody. Clearly they didn't do a good enough job, or maybe it just shifted over the time. A lot of these things are fixed, so that's not an issue. Generally, you do not have exhaust leaks here, but I'm quite sure that I might have some kind of back pressure system issue going on right here. Issue number 3, very common with aging RC cars. This particular one does have it to some degree. It's not that bad, but a lot of new cars have this too, and that is poor idle. Generally, the poor idle, other than the tune, keep in mind if your idle set screw is set correctly, your engine will shut off when you're not giving it any throttle. Now, that is generally due to the clutch spring being worn. I have here, and I demonstrated this in another video, a new clutch set. This is what an aluminum clutch looks like. This is a 2-shoe aluminum clutch. You can tell in the bag right here, I have the clutch spring. So this clutch spring wraps around the clutch shoes and holds it in place. When the engine RPM is to a sufficient degree where there's enough centripetal force, the spring will do its best to hold together the clutch shoes, but it will still come apart a little bit. That is actually what's going to be grabbing your clutch bell and making contact in order to make sure that the spur gear will eventually turn. So as these things age, they become a little bit loose. I do have that condition right here. Currently it is not that bad, but in the future I will be replacing the clutch spring. I know one of Issue number 4 with any RC car, but predominantly with the older ones, is a bad tune. Now, learning to tune a Nitro RC car is one of the hardest things you might do in the whole hobby itself. There are some engines that are relatively easy to tune. They only have one needle adjustment valve called the high-speed needle valve on top of the motor here on top of the carburetor, but most have 2. There is a low-speed needle and a high-speed needle. Some actually have 3, also the mid-speed needle. This particular RC only has the low and the high. Now, learning to adjust them is an art form in itself. This particular one seems well tuned, but one word of advice, always check what the factory needle settings are. A lot of this information you could easily find on Google or online, obviously in the manuals if you have to the original RC cars that you have. Always recommend setting your high speed and low speed needle back to the original factory settings. I always like to remove the actual needle pin itself just to make sure that it's clean on the bottom. A lot of times these older RCs do tend to gum up in the carburetor area there, so no matter what adjustment you make, believe it or not, it will be irrelevant because your fuel or your oil mixture will be gummed up in the carb anyway. So always a good idea to remove the high-speed needle valve and use some carb cleaner or some nitro cleaner in the opening there. You want to physically observe that it does come out. Other than the needle settings to the carburetor, a bad tune could also be obviously just from a worn engine. So as your engine tends to wear, the piston and cylinder coating inside will just create a little bit less compression, and your compression will actually be lower. A good way to check it is to spin the flywheel on the bottom with your finger. You could easily just take the car, turn it upside down like this, take this flywheel, spin it with your finger. You should feel some good resistance there. Going one way, I feel a good amount of resistance. I can barely spin it right now. So this engine has good compression. That is not the issue here. This goes without saying that obviously in certain climates, warmer, colder, higher humidity, lower humidity, you will obviously have to adjust your carb settings. If you buy one of these on eBay and then you try to run in your climate, it's always going to be different from the buyer or the seller. Always got to set it back to factory settings and retune from there. That's basically the rule of thumb with one of these. Since this is a 12 CVX, the X in the OS engine lineup means that it is a pull start. Now, pull start on their own has a whole bunch of problems. This one has the problem with the pull start as well. It does work, but it's one of those things as these engines age, there is a one-way bearing in the actual recoil starter itself. So when you pull the pull start cord, right, it's supposed to spin over the engine. Now, as I pull this one, it grabs, but I don't know if you guys can hear it, it skips like a couple other turns. Now, whenever you put fuel in here and you try to start it, it actually gets even more pronounced and it's worse. What I usually wind up having to do is clean the one-way bearing, and pretty much after about 2 to 3 runs, the one-way bearing will now have more oil in it and it'll just slip once again. This is very common. This assumes that actually your recoil starter is still working, but the one-way bearing, you always got to maintain it. Make sure that it is oil-free. You want to use some good carb cleaner or nitro cleaner to clean the actual one-way bearing inside. Very important. This thing is always spinning no matter what. A good way to remedy that, and something I will be doing in the future, is either get a sealed back plate or you could just get a starter box. So there is a system available where you basically just have a wheel on the bottom of a box, and you basically just put your car on top of it and it will manually spin your flywheel for you. That is actually what you're doing with the pull starter anyway. So you could tell right here I'm spinning, and this whole length of the pull start that I'm kind of spinning right now with my hand, this is about 12 inches. It's only spinning the engine over one time. I could only really feel one kind of point of resistance. Well, sometimes it's a little more because I have fuel in here, so it's creating a little bit more of a pressure effect on the system. But once it warms up, it's virtually impossible to start when this thing is already warm after, you know, it's shut off from poor idle or so. I didn't even describe all the problems on this particular one. This is gonna have to be another video. This is a very in-depth situation going on here, and that is the 2-speed. Sometimes you experience a condition where even if your engine is at high RPM, your 2-speed doesn't shift. This one doesn't shift. I've already been revving it pretty much all the way in there. Now, I adjusted the springs a little bit, but then again, I couldn't start it today at the field to test it out. That was gonna be a cool video to hear this thing shift into second gear, but it didn't do it. So, you know, failed me once again. I have to look at it like this, but that's okay. I like looking at this particular RC car, you know. OS designed their engines so nice that even when they don't start, you just like the design of it, and you know, it's like kind of an ornament to me. But there it is, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I'm always curious to hear what other Nitro RC car issues you might have, and if you have any of the ones that I covered. I definitely have about 4 of them right now. I'm gonna work on it, and hopefully this thing will shift into second gear. I actually want to see how fast this is. They were claimed that they could possibly do up to 60 miles an hour with a 2-speed. That's going to be something I really want to check. We'll see whether a 20-year-old HPI RC car could hang with the brushless / VXLs of today, right? Till next time.